All right, looking at the five modern MLB forfeits, histories, and lessons from those five modern forfeits. Those are the five forfeits that have occurred in Major League Baseball since 1960. My name is Dr. Luke Mashburn. I'm the chair of kinesiology and wellness at Georgia Highlands College, and that is my email address if you have any questions about the presentation. All right, why does this topic matter? Why is this something that is interesting in any way? First of all, the history of the forfeit is interesting, in my opinion. We're going to talk about five different games, and quite frankly, they are five crazy stories, five very interesting situations in Major League Baseball that are very unique. And so I think that is important. This is a history conference, and the history of those is great. The future of forfeits has been back in the news as of late. The Athletic ran an article at the start of this baseball season, asking if we'd start to see forfeits again. Major League Baseball has changed their rules regarding when position players can pitch and things like that. So there's a question that's been battered around is should a manager just forfeit a game? If you're down 8 or 9 runs late in the game, should you just hang it up and consider that a loss and not burn arms, not risk throwing a position player, all of those things. So we may see the Major League Baseball forfeit come back into play here. We've also seen it recently, going back to history, come into play in the past few years with COVID. We didn't have a forfeit due to COVID or any situations like that. We did have some unique things. The Baltimore Orioles playing an empty game stadium amid a protest and things like that. But we didn't have any forfeits there. And then I do think it's important, as we do with Nash, to look at our history so that we can learn from it. And there are a lot of modern lessons for sports industry practitioners that we can take out of these forfeits. So first of all, what is a forfeit? A forfeit in Major League Baseball is when one team refuses to play or when the home team has allowed a situation that makes the game unplayable. It goes down in the record books and for the season total as a 9-0 win to the team that, of course, is awarded the win via forfeit. And all of the players' stats do count for that game, though. So even though it's a 9-0 win, the stats will still count. So, pretty interesting there that, a player can maybe hit 2 or 3 home runs, but their team loses 9-0. But that is the rule according to Major League Baseball. And we have seen 5 of these since 1960. The Senators' last game at RFK, 10-cent beer night with the Cleveland Indians, the Tarp game in Toronto, Disco Demolition Night, famous Bill Veeck promotion in Chicago, and the Dodger Stadium Ball Night. You'll see that 4 of these occurred in the 1970s. Apparently, the 70s were a crazy time. Who knew? And of course, the most recent one was just over 25 years ago. It has been over a decade and a half, or over 2.5 decades, excuse me, since we have had a forfeit in Major League Baseball. Let's look at these 5 forfeits in a little more depth. The Senators' last game at RFK. This is the second incarnation of the Washington Senators. They were moving to the Dallas area to become the Texas Rangers. Everyone knew this. It was no secret that this was their last game in our nation's capital. And the Senators were winning 7-5 in the top of the ninth. They had 2 outs, actually. And of course, in the top of the ninth, when the home team is winning, you're 1 out away from the end of the ball game. And the Senators, this was the second time that they had left in 12 years. The first version of the Senators left for Minnesota and became the Twins. And so you had some fans that were displeased. And there were issues all throughout this game with fans coming on the field and causing problems. There were issues with security. Security abandoned their post, and lots of people entered the game without tickets. So interestingly enough, despite fans being very, very upset, this game was actually over capacity because a number of people were allowed to come in. And you had souvenir hunters. You had people who were literally taking the stadium apart brick by brick, taking the padding off of the walls, looking for souvenirs of the final game. I guess thinking that RFK Stadium wasn't going to be used after this. When, of course, it was used for the the Washington NFL franchise. And of course, RFK still stands today, went through a fire last year. But what is the important lesson here? There's always a tomorrow. When you manage events and facilities, which I should have done a better job of introducing myself prior to earning my doctorate. I worked in event and facility management at the Division I level and the professional sports level for about a dozen years. And when you manage events and facilities, there's no such thing as there's no tomorrow. There's always a tomorrow. Your building's always still going to be there. It's still going to be in use. And you can't just call it in. It's very easy to do that at the end of 162 game Major League season, at the end of a long college football season. It's very easy to check out. But that's not something that modern event managers, modern facility managers can do. You have to continue to play till the final whistle, to use a sports cliche, and make sure that everything is taken care of. Because again, just because the season is over, that doesn't mean that the day-to-day operations of the facility and things like that are coming to an end. So that's a very important lesson that we can take from this final game at RFK Stadium. Probably my favorite baseball game of all time. Probably one of the craziest situations outside of Disco Demolition Night in the history of pro sports is 10-cent beer night. Cleveland, Ohio. You've got the Cleveland Indians, as the franchise was known then, hosting the Texas Rangers. Interestingly enough, the Rangers that had left Washington in that last forfeit. There was a 6-beer limit that night. It was not enforced in any way, shape, or form. If you know anything about this game, you know that people were allowed to drink as many beers as they liked. There were incidents in the 3rd inning, incidents in the 5th inning. You could see that things were ramping up here. And then in the 9th, fans came on to the field. They tried to take the hat of the left fielder, Jeff Burrows, for the Texas Rangers. It was the bottom of the 9th and a tie ball game. The Rangers saw their man go down, and they believed he was being attacked. So if you take a look at this photo, they stormed out of their dugout armed with baseball bats, ready to defend their player. By the time they got out there, they were surrounded. A full-scale riot had erupted, and the Cleveland team actually had to come out of their dugout, armed with bats as well, to try to fight their own fans to save their colleagues on the other team. Somehow, both teams and the umpires were able to get off the field. The game was, of course, declared a forfeit at that point due to the violence and the riot and the fact that they couldn't get everybody off the field. And the Texas Rangers would be awarded the win there. Some lessons here, proper enforcement of underage drinking, of any kind of rules. You had situations here leading up in the 3rd inning and the 5th inning where an event manager kind of sees, hey, we've got a problem here, and you should be focusing on that. Obviously, as you continue to ply people with alcohol, that gets more difficult to do. So it's very important that we have proper enforcement. That's something that is commonplace now. Most stadiums, most teams are going to use a third-party vendor for that, a concessionaire, someone like a Sodexo or an Aramark, to do that, to one, take some liability off of them, and to two, ensure that proper enforcement and that we aren't running into these situations where fans are overserved and dangerous. The tarp game, this is the only one of these 5 that was a voluntary forfeit, meaning that the manager decided to not put his team on the baseball field. This was the first year of the expansion Toronto Blue Jays. This was prior to the Rogers Center. They didn't have a dome at this time. It was 4-0 to the Blue Jays in the top of the 5th. And interestingly, the Orioles were in a very tight pennant race. They were in a 3-way race with the Yankees and the Red Sox for the American League. There was a tarp in foul ground. The bullpens were in foul territory, but were playable. As we've seen with some stadiums, San Francisco had those, Wrigley Field had those until they were moved just a few years ago. Obviously, we don't see those as much anymore, but obviously back in this time, you had bullpens in foul territory that were more or less playable. A tarp was placed over the bullpen of the Blue Jays. Interestingly, a tarp was not placed over the bullpen of the Orioles. And Earl Weaver, known for his calm demeanor and getting along with umpires. That's sarcasm if you aren't very familiar with baseball. Earl Weaver did not get along with umpires. The picture here of Earl arguing with an umpire is pretty much what he did. And he had some issues with this tarp. No one ever really found out his real reasoning. Some do speculate that he was upset that the home team had a tarp and that he didn't, but he believed the tarp was unsafe and that one of his players would be going after a ball in foul territory and they would injure themselves. He pulled his team off the field, much to the chagrin of several of his players. The great Brooks Robinson argued with him, among others. They should play the game under protest. In fact, the umpires encouraged him to play the game under protest in case they did lose. They could go back to this place in time. But Weaver was adamant that it was not a safe condition. He pulled his players off, and 15 minutes later, per the rulebook, a forfeit was awarded. This is a big one. On-field player safety is still so important. We continue to see this. Reggie Bush hurt himself on a concrete apron in the NFL. A few years ago, a Major League Baseball player, Dustin Fowler, was making his debut for the Yankees, and he hurt himself at the White Sox Stadium. On-field player safety is still a work in progress, but it is paramount. And so it's something that facility managers, event managers have to be aware of, that on-field safety should be key, although it is still a work in progress. Disco Demolition Night is, of course, one of the most famous promotions of all time by the great Bill Veeck. This was when he owned the Chicago White Sox. This was a doubleheader, and they were going to end disco by blowing up the records, as you can see in the picture. And they blew a hole in the field. On top of that, there was, again, what can only be described as a riot. Players were not on the field, thankfully, for this one, because it was a doubleheader, but fans took the field and did so much damage, in addition to the large hole in the outfield from the explosion of the disco records, that the field was unplayable. And the lesson here, this may not be a popular one, but this is an event and facility guy speaking here. The game and making sure that the surface is playable and that everything can happen is greater than marketing. It's more important than a marketing stunt. And teams, organizations need to be aware of that and make sure that they are doing things to make sure that the game's going to be played. Because yes, marketing is very important, and that's all well and good, and we have to have fans there. But you also have to have the game. So the game is always greater than marketing. And our last forfeit, Dodger Stadium Ball Night, 1995, 28 years ago. 2-1 Cardinals, bottom of the ninth. Some controversial calls took place. Raul Mondesi was called out on strikes, and the crowd didn't agree. And 1,500 souvenir baseballs rained down. This has been going on since about the 7th inning. But when that tough call came in, the great Tommy Lasorda was ejected, and the balls came raining down, and it made the game unplayable. What's the lesson here? Don't arm your fans. Don't give your fans weapons. That's why we don't give projectiles anymore. That's why we don't give bat nights anymore, and we don't do things that could allow our fans to have something that could cause injury to people on the field or other people in the stands. So moving, of course, very rapidly in this 15-minute time frame to our conclusion. Most of these games happened in late innings. I think that's pretty interesting. Maybe some controversy there, some stress. Also, maybe 9 innings worth of drinking, or 8 innings worth of drinking, whenever the last call is. And as you see, most of these, 4 of the 5, were the result of a lack of crowd control. Obviously, Earl Weaver pulled his team off, but we didn't have any crowd control in the other situations, and that those are very, very important. I'm not sure that we will see a forfeit quite like this ever again. We've come close with some debris on the field. I live in the Atlanta area, and there was a very famous infield fly rule game with the Braves where a lot of trash was thrown on the field, but I don't know that we will ever see a forfeit quite like any of these ever again, but we may see some with managers making that decision moving forward, as The Athletic pointed out. So thank you guys so much, and if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email about it.